Welcome to the session Cyber Recovery in K-12, hosted by your very own ConvergeOne. My name is Susan Bernard. I'm one of the board members of ACPE. I'll be here in the background helping with any questions, but we got a good team here and I think they know what's going on. So I understand it's supposed to be a pretty interactive session, so feel free to get those questions going and they'll be handling those in the chat or bringing you to stage. I will turn it on over to Robert. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. We certainly hope you're having a great experience at ACPE this year. I've got to say, at the risk of sounding like a broken record and probably what many other presenters have said during the conference, we really wish we could be there in person. But that aside, it's not going to stop us from addressing some of the critical issues facing K-12 technologists right now, like what we're talking about here in this session. So once again, hello everyone. My name is Robert Redd. I'm National Director for our public sector practice at ConvergeOne. And fortunately for you and fortunately for me, I am not alone in doing this presentation. I'm joined by Brian Larson, who's our field leader for the Pacific Northwest here, as well as Tony Ocampo. And I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about Tony in just a minute, but he is our national technical lead for cyber recovery. And he'll be leading the discussion through quite a bit of this for us today. So Brian, Tony and I, we work at ConvergeOne, which is an almost $2 billion solutions provider. We work across numerous verticals, but this team and our peers throughout the country, we're responsible for working with about 2,000 customers in the public sector. And as a solutions provider, you can imagine that gives us a pretty great purview into the challenges of K-12, as well as trends and answers, and certainly one in particular, cyber recovery, that we're going to address. In fact, we had a webinar to our K-12 leaders maybe about a month ago. It was top 5 focus areas for K-12 technologists right now. Things like return to class. You know, is our network and our wireless ready for socially distanced learning? Different expectations in the modern classroom based on a year working and learning remotely. For new expectations, new devices that come onto the campus. Cloud labs was another topic. You know, how are we liberating some of the computer assets that, you know, for the most part just sat in those on-campus labs and weren't able to deliver apps. Really kind of a legacy, or what's becoming a legacy approach to app delivery to students. A few other topics as well, but we had 2 solutions architects on that webinar. Both of them former C-level K-12 technologists. They both agree that the #1 trend technology issue to solve for right now is ransomware readiness. And so collectively, we know the issues around this, right? We know the headlines. Sometimes it hits a little too close to home. We know that from experience. But it has been our charter now, this team, and as national leaders at ConvergeOne that have been identified now in this space to enable our K-12 leaders to have an answer. To have an answer to the community, to have an answer to the board, to their leadership. And that answer, in my opinion, is that recovery with minimal impact is absolutely possible. And we know that. We know that from experience because we've helped our customers in K-12 do it. So Tony, if you don't mind going to the next slide. When it comes to preparation, the important thing for us to focus on is how to set ourselves up for success in when, not if, compromises. And that's been a key focus for us, when, not if, compromises. And in K-12, we know what the challenges are, right? We've had, even before the pandemic, a widening perimeter. And for years, we've been saying that the perimeter is probably the wrong parameter when we're looking at addressing that expanding threat landscape. I might modify that to mean not the wrong parameter, but it's just one parameter of many. And it can be challenging, right? When you're presenting a solution to the board to address ransomware or really anything that's within the cybersecurity landscape, in that cybersecurity posture, that umbrella you put around yourselves, it can be very complicated and challenging to articulate to board members and leadership. In addition to that, we know now with years of data that K-12 is a lucrative target, one that the FBI has specifically singled out. You can see some of the stats there in the bottom right corner. 1 in every 2 reported ransomware attacks in America is targeting K-12. And certain months last year, that was even higher, approaching 57% of all ransomware incidents. And quite frankly, that threat landscape is outpacing what we're doing by and large across that purview of K-12 customers we work with. Certainly, it's outpacing manpower and woman power, and in some instances, our skill set. It's 24/7. It's not within our timetable, and so the challenges are severe for K-12, and I think we can acknowledge that. But we also want to acknowledge that we can't have an answer for this. We don't need to acknowledge that this is just a matter of time. We can absolutely have an answer to respond with minimal impact in a solution that makes sense to technical but also non-technical individuals. It provides an answer to the superintendent, which for the most part is responsible for compromised data within the district. And you'll want to check who's responsible in your district, but by and large, that represents the superintendent who bears a burden for that responsibility. Do we have an answer to our superintendents and our leadership on this front? And it's also important that more than protection here, we're offering a kind of, don't beat me up just yet, but we're offering a kind of learning loss prevention through an approach to ransomware that offers us the ability to recover. And of course, you look at the stats right now, especially in regards to the stimulus dollars and the different ESSER categories. When we talk about learning loss, typically that is referring to online tutoring, right? How do we catch students up that have been at a disadvantage during this time? But I would argue here as well, when you consider the risks of a ransomware attack, when you consider the downtime, which could be days, weeks, we've seen it before in excess of weeks, closer to a month. When you consider the challenges to recover from that kind of outage of learning, when data is compromised, when grades could potentially be compromised, there is an argument, I believe, to be made here for learning loss. Being able to recover prevents that outage, which can be so critical. But we also know there's other things like unrecoverable ADA, which we've seen it firsthand with districts. Ransomware is terrible, but it's not a natural disaster. So you're not going to be able to recoup that ADA for a loss of time, uptime in the network. But that's just one of the categories marking, excessive costs, whether it's the outage itself, the reconstruction, which is usually going to be time and a half working around the clock to get that solved for. And hopefully not in this position we would find ourselves in, but the ransom itself can pose its own excessive costs in addition to loss of data. There are so many reasons to be investigating this in a way that reduces the complexity and provides us the assurance, the immutability of our data, a repository that we can trust, even when, not if, but even when an event like this compromise could occur within our own districts. So Tony, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I just want to give us a picture for our remaining time together and talk a little bit about that agenda. You'll see there, we'll get things kicked off here with an evolving threat landscape and just talk a little bit more about what we're facing as K-12 technologists. Then we're also going to kind of cast backup in this kind of ransomware readiness approach and also differentiate it. Not all backup is equal. It's going to be a little different than some of the other categories that backup falls under. So Tony's going to walk us through some of the differentiation there and where we need to focus. But then we'll also get to arguably my favorite part, which is a tale of two districts. And I said earlier, we're speaking from experience on this front. And so we're going to highlight what this looks like in an event where someone has their preparation, their ransomware readiness in place, operational, versus an incident at a district where that was not the case. And we're going to kind of contrast those two. I also want to make sure that we leave the membership here at ACPE with some resources, and that is going to come with a depiction of the architecture, the things that we look at when we're putting this together. It's not just one manufacturer solution. In fact, Tony will talk about this, but in our case, it's more like 7, and even more product families within those manufacturers. Best of breed, what it takes to create the kind of environment that we need in order to rely on that kind of recovery safely. So we're going to look at the architecture. We're also going to take a look at a sample runbook that you can also apply to your own initiatives in ransomware readiness, as well as a solutions model. We can break down for you really what it looks like when we're checking the boxes for a customer, when we're helping them evaluate their own strategies, not just in the technology, but in the people, the process, the policies. We want to spell that out for you. And we'll do that a little bit more as well when we talk about our own waves approach. And of course, we'll be talking about how we view the world, but really there's an invitation there to take those steps, those pieces of the puzzle that we look at, and then apply them into your own environment. Whether you do anything with us at all, I think there's enough there, enough puzzle pieces where you can extract them and make them work for you. But following that, and it was said earlier by our kind host, I want to just reiterate it. We're measuring our success here based on how helpful we can be to this team. So please give us those questions. As things are coming up, we would love to be able to address those as we go along, but we're also going to save ourselves some time there at the end to talk a little bit more together and address those questions for you live. So please do not be afraid. Any option, any topic, nothing's off the table. Let us know, and we'd love to bring it into the fold here and make it a part of our conversation today. Well, with that, Tony, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Tony Ocampo is, 30 years in the industry. I'm really across the entire data center stack, but also in particular roadmaps and advisory strategies, which is really what we're leaning on him for today. So he's a specialist, not just across the data center, but also specifically for us in cyber recovery, supporting the public sector. And his purview is really laser focused for us in the West and the coastal area. So Tony, we're very glad to have you on board for the conversation today. And please be, as a viewer of this session, please be listening, be leaning in and look for those opportunities where you can ask Tony for his expertise. This is an individual who has lived through this. We have a few on our team, right? The former CIO of Jackson Public Schools, second largest in Mississippi, also part of our team, also a Ryuk survivor. There's a lot of DNA that goes into what we're talking about today, and Tony is really leading the charge for this practice for ConvergeOne. So, Tony, very glad to hear what you have to say for us today. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Am I coming through okay? Can you guys hear me?
You sound great.
Okay, very good. Well, good afternoon, everybody out there in the Pacific Northwest. As Robert said, my name is Tony Ocampo, 30 plus years in data center and data protection, right? So quite a lot of years and experience around data protection specifically. And when you talk about data protection, you normally back in the day talk about backups and recovery. And data protection today has kind of evolved into a much more sophisticated technology simply because of the types of threats that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Back in the day, it's a simple deletion of data, simple data erasure because of human error. nowadays is a lot more going on. You have disasters and ransomware and all kinds of cyber attacks. So we're going to cover a lot of content today. I'm going to walk you through, and you saw the agenda there. I'm going to walk you through what we do, what the architecture is, and feel free to ask any questions through the Q&A window. We'll be more than glad to answer it, time permitting, and on the fly. Especially if something just clicks in your mind and you gotta ask that question, because for some of you, maybe some of the concepts that we're going to show you might be a little bit different of what you're used to, or maybe something new. We'll be more than glad to address those questions and concerns, right? Um, Also, this webinar is recorded and will be available to everyone that wants to watch it again. And I believe we can give you a copy of the presentation in PDF format. So, so without further ado, let's go at it. Again, my name is Tony Ocampo. I am the National Technical Lead for Data Protection and Cyber Recovery for ConvergeOne. Um, so cyber recovery, when we talk about cyber recovery, we're talking about a data center data protection solution and not a security solution, right? So big difference with cybersecurity and cyber recovery. They work together, right? But when you're talking about cyber security, you're mostly talking about mitigation, perimeter protection, endpoints and desktops and firewalls and all kinds of prevention at the front, right? When we're talking about cyber recovery, this is usually a sophisticated recovery system or a backup and recovery system, which basically is your data of last resort. In a lot of cases, your traditional backup is not your data of last resort. Okay, it and we're going to show you why that is, right? But in the event that you get attacked by ransomware, and we've seen this real time, firsthand, I've seen it first time, and I'm going to show you some slides of what we've actually done with some K-12 customers that we've actually worked with that has been hit by ransomware and what we did for them, right? So let's go back. Let's keep moving forward here. So here is the evolving cyber threat landscape. And this is not necessarily in education, but the biggest impact today is K-12. At every 11 seconds, a cyber attack occurs. 145 million attacks in 2020 alone. Okay, that's a staggering number. Very, very sobering. The reason why these attacks happen because they are profit generated. They're profit motivated. They are financially motivated. When you get hit by ransom, you know they're wanting money from you, right? And they're seeing today K-12 as a great source of that financial profit from sending ransomware attack vectors and forcing this K-12 organization to fess up and pay the ransom, right? Attacks financially motivated, costing hundreds of millions of dollars across all industries, especially in the public sector, especially in education, and most especially in K-12. Over $5 trillion of global risk over the next 5 years, and significantly more past that. Ransomware attacks are continually going after backup systems. And for obvious reasons, we know that if for some reason that you get attacked by ransomware, the very first thing that you're going to try to do is to recover that data. And if you do not have the ability to recover that data, well, guess what? Your only choice is to wipe your data center, rebuild from scratch without any data, which is not usually a good option. The next option probably is just to pay the ransom, get the decryption key from the bad actors, and move on, hoping that you will get the decryption key, hoping that they will give you the decryption key. And in one of the customers or one of the K-12 schools districts that we work with, they paid the ransom initially, and 6 months later, they came back for more, right? The first one really was a smaller threat, more like a teaser or a tester. The second time, 6 months later, they went for the gusto. They walked into their data center and it was completely wiped, including the backup. I'm going to talk to you about that in a little bit. Now, 69% lack the confidence in ability to recover after a crippling ransomware attack. That is a very, very sobering number. That's a lot of organizations that cannot recover from a crippling attack. And most organizations think because they have a traditional backup or even a disaster recovery system that they can recover from that. And I'm going to show you why cyber recovery is not disaster recovery. In fact, I wrote a blog about it, and there are very distinct differences with the two. Okay? All right. So I'm sure some of you have seen this website. It's called State Scoop. This is specifically a heat map or a map where these dots represent, in this time frame, all the ransomware attacks. If you go to that website and click on these dots, it will actually tell you which school district or school got attacked by ransomware. It will give you some detail on what the type of attack, what kind of ransomware, and what they did, right? And if you can see, it's starting. This is all the way up to this year, and it's quite a bit of hits all over the country, right? So go visit this website, and this will give you a lot of information. And we see there's quite a bit in the Pacific Northwest and in the West. So, and a lot of concentration in the East and towards the middle part of the country. But again, nobody is excused or exempted from ransomware, right? So they will try to hit you whether you're protected or not. They're going to try. They're going to, and these guys are very, very educated. They are probably better than a lot of the best IT and security people that we have working as good guys. And some of these bad guys have doctorate degrees and PhDs in engineering and security and information technology, right? So it is an industry. Ransomware business is an industry, and it's in the millions of dollars, possibly billions of dollars. Okay. So in the news, we see it every day. We're looking at mainstream media outlets reporting specifically schools being the leading targets of ransomware attacks. Parents are even involved. They're at the end of their chain. Schools, and because these schools, these K-12 organizations have student information systems or student data, and they are vital in the operation and the existence of education, right? So it's everywhere. We see it in the news every day. Just recently, another school district up in the Pacific Northwest got hit, right? I'm not going to mention the name, but you guys probably know who it is. But this was just a couple of days ago. Is that correct, Brian? Just a couple of days ago or sometime last week, somebody out there got hit, and it's just everywhere, right? And these are ransomware gangs. They found another set of new targets: schools and universities, schools specifically. And there's a big reason why schools are getting hit, right? Because schools, as we all know, you guys support a lot of users in your schools, right? Unlike the larger private enterprise organizations, some school districts, or in some schools have a limited number of personnel managing enterprise scale environments, right? If you were a Fortune 500 company and you were supporting 5,000 or 10,000 users, you would probably have hundreds of IT people. But in schools and school districts, you don't have that kind of staffing that you would compare to enterprise scale organizations. So schools are an easy target. Okay? So last year, a couple federal organizations, the FBI, came out with this bulletin on the left side. And they basically made an announcement, and because of their awareness and because K-12s are being attacked on a rampant basis, that they are being targeted, and so the FBI released this notification, this bulletin, stating, and there are guidelines here on what advising school districts on procedures and operations and measures on how to watch out and prevent ransomware attacks. Now, consequently, the Department of Treasury issued this advisory back in October, stating that if you pay the ransom, essentially enabling the ransomware attackers, your organization is going to be penalized with potential sanctions for paying the ransom. So basically, they're saying, do not pay the ransom or you guys will get in trouble. So what is your only option at this point? The option of paying the ransom is also not a possibility. So the option now is to restore from your good backups, restore your data, rebuild your systems and restore the data. And in a lot of cases, that may not be applicable because we're seeing that ransomware is increasingly targeting backup systems. And again, I'm going to reiterate why. It's because backup systems are exposed in your production data center. If they can get into your production data in your production system, which is in the same environment or in the same data center, in the same network as your production data, then they can see the backup system as well. And that's the first thing they're going to go after. They're going to encrypt all your backup images. We've actually seen them destroy the backup controllers, the storage controllers for the backup repositories, and actually deleting the backups. So you cannot restore from those backups at all. Okay. So what do you do? So we're going to cover in the next slides what we've done and what we recommend, and based on FBI guidelines, based on compliance guidelines from the Department of Treasury and other industry regulatory and organizations that provide guidelines on how to protect your data and how to protect your backup. Okay?
And Tony, I think that's a really good point. You look at, we look outside of K-12, and the GDPR is advocating for this, right? This confidentiality, integrity, availability. They've got a few other adjectives there. Department of Health and Human Services talks about backups offline and unavailable. DOJ says roughly the same. And so what we have here is, I think, NIST and CIS controls, if you follow that and make that a part of your security posture, you have a solution here in backup that absolutely slots into those paradigms. And so in some cases, we may have felt that K-12 is lagging behind some of these other industries that are really going after a cyber recovery approach to ransomware readiness. But just in its own nature, I think it really does fit into what you're already doing with NIST and CIS controls.
Well said, Robert. Okay, so let's get into what cyber recovery is and isn't. So cyber recovery is not traditional backups, and in all cases, cyber recovery is not disaster recovery. Okay, so geographic dispersion, which is common in disaster recovery, does not necessarily work in cyber recovery. Okay, because geographic dispersion, as in having a failover or disaster recovery site in a different location from your primary production data center, like most organizations do for disaster recovery, does not protect you from ransomware. Why is that? Because geographic dispersion requires a synchronous or asynchronous replication of your data to this secondary DR or failover site. So to give you a quick recovery time or a quick failover time and a short recovery point to be able to bring your data back. So what's the scenario, right? In geographic dispersion, you have a production data center that you're replicating your backups or your production data to a DR site. It is connected over a fast internet connection or a wide area network, and that connectivity is never shut down because you want that replication to be always happening, either asynchronously or synchronously. You want the recover point to be short or near, and you want the recovery time to be quick, right? And so hence you would provide sometimes a very, very fast network connection to that geographically dispersed disaster recovery site. Traditional backup and DR rules and policies and playbooks do not apply in cyber recovery. And those rules, policies, and playbooks are usually, if you have an outage in your production site, you have some sort of a mechanism to fail over or declare a disaster, and that your application data and workloads will immediately shift, basically doing a failover to that disaster recovery site. Now, once you've shifted your production workload and production data to the replicated disaster recovery site, you can now essentially run production in a failover site up until you can fix or able to replicate back and resynchronize back or fail back to your original production site, right? So that's your traditional DR, right? That doesn't happen in cyber recovery. And I'm going to explain that in a little bit. Cyber recovery requires a complete protection of all data and infrastructure components. So that school district that I was talking to you about or mentioning earlier, they walk in and everything got encrypted. Their files, the storage controllers, the network switches were destroyed, the backups were destroyed. So in a lot of cases, we don't normally backup configurations of those devices. Those are out of band components of your data center that you sometimes don't back up. So if you needed to rebuild your system from scratch, for example, a storage array, if that storage array, the controller configuration was destroyed by ransomware, then you have to rebuild that that configuration on the controllers, the network configuration, the storage volume configuration, the policies, the LAN masking, the logical units, and all the protocols need to reconfigure. then represented to your host for access. If those configurations are not there and they're not backed up, which in a lot of cases we've seen they're not, you're going to need that to rebuild your data center. Those are infrastructure components. Because a full wipe and rebuild of the production data center is usually the case when a ransomware attack happens. In the school district that we work with, when they discovered that they were attacked by ransomware, we had the ability to recover from their cyber recovery system instantly if they wanted to. But because they had requirements to report their ransomware attack to regulatory bodies like state, local, and federal, and even their cyber insurance provider, they had to bring in a incident response team to do forensics on their data center, essentially turning it into a crime scene. And so while we were waiting for them to give us the thumbs up to restore. We were able to restore the data in a staging area isolated from the production data center while they're doing their forensics. And now we're getting into a concept of a vault because those cyber recovery systems, the platforms, the copies of the backups in a repository has to be in an isolated environment that is invisible from the production data center. The reason why we promulgate that, because if your ransomware attack vector happens to be living in your production center, they could possibly go around your production system and study and understand the workflow of your data center and eventually get to your backups and destroy the backup. Now, if they cannot visually get to the vaulted, isolated cyber recovery system, then the possibility of that is highly unlikely to be encrypted or destroyed, right? Because they cannot see it. And I'm going to show you the architecture, how we do that isolation, right? When that data is isolated in that vault, okay, then we would want to analyze that data. It's not just because we're copying it into this immutable storage inside the vault and we're happy. No, we take extra steps to analyze that. And we have tools that use machine learning and heuristics and indexing and comparative analysis and additional forensics to understand where that ransomware came from, when it made it to your production data center, and who possibly put it there, right? And that backup analytics is the one that help us. And this is all happening in that isolated vault. Having that ability to restore in a clean recovery vault post-attack is really important. Like I said, when the FBI came in into the school district and told us it's a lockdown, disconnect everything while we do our forensics. The incident response team came in. They manually copied all the data in virtual machines on portable drives, and they took it to our lab for forensics. That means no connectivity to the data center, no internet. We actually pulled the cable from the internet router because we know that ransomware, the attack vector, sits in your data center, but while it's doing its dirty deed, it's actually getting instructions from a command and control outside of your environment in some other country in a lot of cases. So when that communication stops, then that's how you quell further attacks in your data center, right? So ability to have that. So let me talk to you about the tale of the two districts. These are real life customers that we work with. So on the left side, this school district, fairly large, Robert, how large was that school district that didn't have a cyber recovery system? It's pretty large.
Yeah, roughly, they're both the same at around 24,000 students.
Okay, so all they had was traditional backup, and they had a staff of, I believe, 4 in the district office, and they have a few more in the other schools, right? So very small IT staff. And this was in the summertime. Registration is going on. Okay, so they walk into their data center. All they see are blinking lights in their data center, but they could not get in. Storage controllers, network switches, their data completely inaccessible. They go to their backup, completely gone. The storage system for the backup repository, they could not even log into it, right? They basically had to rebuild their data center, and gave them the opportunity to build it in a way which was more secure. Obviously, we helped them do that, but at the end of the day, what happened there is they had to delay school opening by a couple of weeks, right, Robert? Um, because this was in the middle of summer going into
Right.
school opening, and they had to delay school opening by 2 weeks. Okay. Now, the other school district we work with, we did put this cyber recovery system. About roughly 3 weeks to a month later, I got a phone call from the IT director of the school district. This was on a Friday. He says, I think we got hit by ransomware. Fortunately enough, the cyber recovery, we just finished deploying it and had it running for about a month. Okay. So we go in. They called their forensics team from the incident response. They were told to shut everything down, connectivity to the outside world. We had to bring in a device with a firewall that had an LTE connection to be able to remotely access into that environment. So we provided that. We have that device. But the fortunate thing, we went in the vault. The backups were intact. We started validating the backups or the backup copies inside the vault. We started validating the recovery platform if we can restore. And after less than an hour, our validation was done, and we were ready to restore. Right. Unfortunately, the incident response and the FBI advised the school district, you are not restoring any data to production until we tell you to. So now they had basically created a task force that the incident response team deployed on site, basically took over like a crime scene. They started copying everything that they could copy onto portable hard drives to take it to their lab so they can do forensics. They did this for about a couple of weeks. In the meantime, during the 2-week period, we were starting to do our recovers into the isolated vault. So when we did get the thumbs up for recovery, we had the data ready to go. We had servers and storage inside the vault. We had a hyperconverged system inside the vault. We were actually running their VMs already inside the vault, but we could not introduce it back into the production data center until we were given a thumbs up by the incident response team. So what is all about? What is ConvergeOne all about? Because we know exactly what goes on in a ransomware attack. We know exactly how to protect you from those, and we know how to help you recover. So our mission statement to defeat ransomware continually, because it is an evolving threat. We know how it is. We've seen it. And I'm even going to show you a very, very, very scary document after this slide. Many organizations do not have cyber recovery systems to restore secure, clean copies of their data from an isolated repository. And that's the tale of the two districts, right? So our mission is to be in the fight to help our customers, our partners, provide cyber recovery solutions, give them that ability to return to that operational state without having to pay the ransom. That's really the bottom line. We don't want to enable those bad guys, right? We gotta do what we gotta do. We do the good thing, and we stop them in their tracks. So that Friday, we went on site. We looked at their system, and the whole file systems, all the file shares, were renamed, essentially encrypted. None of them were recognizable except this README file that I took a picture of. I could not shoot it so I took my iPhone, took a picture. This is the real ransom note. And this is the actual ransom note for that school district with the instructions on what they need to do to be able to contact the bad actors to get a decryption key or instruction. It was a networker ransomware. So you don't want to see this document in your environment. But this is it. This is the real ransom note that we got. I'm going to give you a few moments here to just kind of read through it, right? But I'm going to give you a copy of this presentation, so you'll have a copy of this ransom note, right? So I'd be shaking my boots if I were working there if I saw this, right? Because I'm pretty much host by the time I see this document. Okay. It's like everybody's looking at it. I'm going to flip it over. So let's talk about the ransomware, ConvergeOne ransomware, or anti-ransomware architecture. So this is what a cyber recovery vault looks like in your environment. So in your traditional network, you would have your workloads, your applications, your data, and then you would back them up to traditional backup and your disaster recovery system, fully connected to your workloads or to your application and data infrastructure, right? And that happens every day. I mean, you got to make sure that. So what we would design for you is this isolated vault system on the right side, and essentially every time a copy happens between the two storage systems or the backup repository storage system, an air gap happens immediately after the delta copy is completed, right? So this is a logical view of what that looks like. So this data path here is only allowing replication traffic from the storage device for the backup targets to a similarly architected backup repository storage inside the vault, right? So let me show you a physical representation of that vault. So on the green side here is your production stack with your backup storage. So in this architecture, we use a Dell data domain or a Dell integrated data protection appliance. And it's doing its traditional day-to-day backups and backup recovery operation. It lives in the same network and environment as your production data center. So this data domain has a single network cable connected to this vault data system. Nothing more. There is no switching, there is no networking. It is a straight cable from the network card of this production storage system to the network card of this vaulted data domain or storage system. So all it's doing is a root level replication from this storage system to this storage system. However, inside the vault, there is a difference with the storage system in there. As you can see, this padlock here, it is what you call an immutable storage system. Many of you who've been in the industry a long time have probably heard of the term worm, or the write once, read many protocol or architecture, right? That's exactly what it is. You can only write to this drive once and read as many times as you need. Once that data is written on that drive, it can no longer be overwritten. It is locked. It is immutable. So you have to consider that you cannot overwrite any of the blocks or the data that you've copied. So you have to obviously take into consideration the sizing of that storage system. Now, once that connection and that copy is done into this immutable retention locked storage system, there is a vault management system depicted by this Dell server. It is actually a virtual machine that communicates to this storage system through an automation script or an orchestration script to basically tell the network interface on this data domain system to shut its NIC, to shut the port. And that is your air gap right there. And so now this vault is completely isolated. If there was a ransomware that was inside your production system, there's no way it's going to see it. It's nowhere going to see it because there is no networking from this storage to this storage. And now with the air gap, it's even more isolated now. Once that air gap is now in place, we have a solution called CyberSense. It is an analytics-based machine learning and heuristic software that uses indexing and comparison technology to compare the blocks in the data based on application known good writes and prior copies of the data that's been written to the storage system. So if you are doing a delta copy of your data and you see a significant change in your data from the prior day based on a known good write, and you're comparing that there is a big delta between that write yesterday and today's write, then it will mark that as suspect. If there is any sort of alteration, modification, anomaly, or whatever that the CyberSense detects on any new write, then it will mark that for non-recovery, because potentially that could be ransomware vectors that were copied in there. So yeah, that ransomware vector could have landed in your production data system. It could have been backed up. It could have been replicated to the vault site. And the only way to prevent it is this CyberSense analytics to take a look at the backup image. Okay, so what CyberSense does is basically a rinse and repeat process of comparing new data that's ingested into the storage device. Okay, other components in the vault is obviously a console, jump box to get in there if you need to get in there, and a compute and storage platform for recovery. Because what's going to happen here, and I'm going to show you the runtime, if you get attacked by ransomware, you're going to want to recover into this isolated vault recovery platform. Okay. So this is cyber recovery analytics called CyberSense. It scans and analyzes and investigates and just rinses and repeats. So here's the runtime. Okay. Day 0, you walk in and your data center has just been cryptolocked, hit by ransomware. So the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to create 2 teams. The first team could be your incident response team. because what that team does is start investigating, right? Now there's another team that's going to go into the vault, and they're going to start validating backups that they can do inside the vault, and they can start recovering inside the vault. Now the other team, assuming that they were given the go signal by the incident response team that they can start recovering, they now have to scrub the production systems. They have to rebuild it from scratch. They have to maybe take all those devices to factory settings before they can restore it back. Because the last thing you want to do, if you do not scrub those systems, is you could possibly reinfect those systems again, right? And that's the worst thing that could happen. So how does ConvergeOne come in? Because we can provide you the services to deliver a recovery runbook. We help you with the planning and design. We help you with the architecture of the isolation and replication inside the vault. We teach you the analytics and what the capabilities of CyberSense is. And most importantly, how do you restore and recover from a cyber attack, which is very different from a traditional backup recovery or from a traditional disaster recovery, right? So it is very different, right? So when we design a cyber recovery system, our solution model is taking into consideration all the things we talk about, okay? Our process involves discovery of what you got, the architecture components, the physical controls. I mean, you don't want anybody accessing the vault system. You have to have governance and controls that only certain people can get to the cyber recovery system, because anybody can stick a USB drive and your vault is useless, right? So we teach you cyber vault design best practices. We show you the layers of security, especially in the replication protocols, the air gapping and the security hardening of the backup environment, that immutability, the retention locking in the governments, the cyber recovery management system that communicates to the data domain system storage to create that air gap, the CyberSense. What notifications and alerts are you going to get from this system? How do you determine if it's a real infection or if it's a false positive? What are the main components that you're going to store in the vault? Those critical rebuild things that are not part of your data, but they're infrastructure components to rebuild it, such as certificates, media, licenses. Remember, when you're in a ransomware situation and your internet is cut off, you cannot download anything into your system. You gotta have a repository that you can go get your media and licenses and certificates and all the other things. The most difficult part is if you're able to restore data of your production applications and data, but you cannot rebuild your systems because you cannot build your key management server, you cannot build your certificate server because you don't have those components, then you're basically done, right? So what does it really look like? So I like this picture because it tells us that if this is your production data center on the left side that got fully decimated by ransomware, that production data center is completely unusable, like you see in the picture. But knowing that you have this vault on the right side gives you the comfort and security knowing that you can recover. You have the copy of your backup in your data that you can use once you get hit. Once your production data center is destroyed, like on the left side. So what we can do for you, our cyber recovery task force can rebuild or recover and recover. We help you with deployment. We help you with the maintenance. And we provide you all the help you need for recovery assistance, runbook execution, all the stuff that we talk about. We are going to be your lifeline, right? So what does it take?
One thing I'd like to interject here, Tony, very good depiction of a vault strategy. And so I want to make sure if there's any questions about that, if folks here listening in agree with that model, disagree with that model, this team is always game to hear that and talk through the strategies, because I think it does a very good job of showing that not all backup is the right kind of backup in a ransomware scenario. And as we're looking at that checklist and that solutions model, there's certain other items that need to be taken into consideration. But Tony, one question we do get on this that I wanted to pose to you is, so we've kind of agreed here that cyber recovery is not disaster recovery, but with this immutable environment, can it be leveraged in a disaster recovery scenario? Like, do we have a situation where not all DR is CR, but all CR can be DR? What does that look like?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Many of you folks already have systems that you're using already for backups and disaster recovery, right? Because these are data center systems, we help you try to figure out what you have today. So we discover what you have today. We can leverage whatever you have today, like recovery platforms. We can leverage if you have existing supported components, hardware, and software that we can just bolt on with all or some of the components needed to build a vault. So you could have a couple things, right? You could have disaster recovery and you could have cyber recovery. Two different use cases to solving two different solutions, right? Many of our customers, what we're seeing now is they would put their disaster recovery in public cloud, whether Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, right, or some cloud provider, because it gives them the geographic dispersion. But in cyber recovery, you do not need that geographic dispersion. So a cyber recovery vault is probably just a data center system that just lives right next to your production environment, right? So we can certainly take a look at what you got today, see what we can leverage and reuse or repurpose, and definitely we can work with you on that.
Very good, Tony. Thank you.
All right. So again,
we've got a great question there in the chat from Jennifer, which I replied to as well. Where do you start? And Tony and Robert, you can jump in here as well. But I think the workshop that Tony was just speaking to would be a great place to start, understanding what your environment looks like right now, and helping to devise a roadmap from that point to get you to a cyber recovery solution.
Exactly, and that is the next slide, right? So, so the big, just want to go through this slide, and then we'll segue to that workshop. So the big three differentiators with ConvergeOne in the K-12 space, right? The holistic best-of-breed solution stretching 7 manufacturers. We're not dealing just with one manufacturer. If you saw that vault design, there's a lot of components. And there's a lot of automation and orchestration. It is complex. And the reason why it is complex, because the more complex it is, the more difficult it is for ransomware to be able to get to the vault system, right? So there is a purpose for all that, right? But how do you get there? And that's what Brian was just alluding to, right? So ConvergeOne offers what we call a ransomware readiness workshop. What the ransomware readiness workshop is a WAVES methodology, the acronym Workshop Assessment, Validation, Enterprise Architecture. That's the workshop component of our proven WAVES methodology. We can go out and meet with you. This is completely no cost to your organization. We're going to invest the time to work with you through a series of questions, okay? And what this workshop does is provide you a validation, provide you with a gap analysis, provide you with a mitigation report, or even a roadmap on where you are today and where you need to be, right? So that's a workshop that we offer to you at no cost. So if you're interested in doing that, what that workshop is 100 discovery questions across 10 technology sections or domains that we evaluate, right? Then you're going to get one ransomware readiness score, which basically gives you a complete picture of where you stand as far as ransomware readiness based on 60 items that we're going to look at. And we have about up to 50 core findings, concerns, and recommendations. So this is where your roadmap is, right? So all we're asking from you is a 2-hour commitment to sit down with us. We're going to put 8 hours of work into this process. Of course, that data we take back, we analyze that data, we digest it, and we come back with the ransomware readiness report. And that report basically gives you core findings, technology score, right? This is the roadmap, the recommendations and priority mapping. Shows you your areas of strengths, areas to prioritize, and areas that you gotta take care right away, right? And give you a next step roadmap. If you wanna go into deeper dives on what you need to do, if you want more deeper assessments, we can also do that or work with you. So our goal here, that if we are able to validate for you what you've already what you already know or not know, and you see the value of our no-cost workshop, that you continue working with us, we'll be more than happy to do that, right? And that is how we score you based on a readiness scale. We're seeing most K-12s, they're either in the 2 or 3, very few in the 4. We haven't seen a 5, but a lot of them, because we cover a lot of things, 10 technology domains, 100 discovery questions. So there's quite a bit of discovery that we're going to do. So again, it's no cost to you. Reach out to Brian, reach out to me. We'll give you contact information, and we can do the 2-hour workshop.
And I'll say one of the goals out of this is a presentation of the findings. That it's important for us that we're not just in the nuts and bolts of it, but that it's also appropriate for the business side of the house. So it almost, like you see there on the readiness scale, almost a red, yellow, green format to the findings, because like it was brought up by Jennifer, there's a lot of complexity here, but the ultimate end state we want to get to is an architecture which provides you a simplified approach to that restoration of data. And some of that might be in the technology side, some of it might also be your people and getting an idea of even something like fish-prone percentages at the district. So it covers a wide range of things, and the output is something that may look like more of a multi-year strategy and approach, or it might be something that you take on more quickly, but we can kind of help to space that out so that the folks that we work with can wrap their head around the strategy and how to address based on maturity of where they're at today.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. You did a great job of illustrating, I think, the answer to Jennifer's question earlier, and Robert, you make a great point. One of the comments in the chat section was that this can be overwhelming, and I think when you look at it as to what the end goal is and look only at that, absolutely it can feel overwhelming. But what comes out of a workshop like this is actually a way to stair-step that. Exactly. Chop it up into phases, right? Make it digestible, and it may be multi-year, but then it gives you that roadmap to follow step by step, and it becomes a living document for you as you go forward. Robert, you also mentioned earlier that cyber recovery is different than cybersecurity, but there's a lot of overlay there, and what we find a lot of times is out of these workshops, there will be more steps and or maybe mini projects on the cybersecurity side that will come out of that as well. So there's a lot of connections there. One other question I wanted to call out here, which is a great one that we just got here, was what prevents, and Tony, I'll direct this to you, what prevents the ransomware infected data from traversing across the air gap to the vault.
Nothing.
A lot of us hear the term air gap all the time, and maybe a little bit better definition on what that truly is when done right. But can you answer that one for us?
Right. Great question. Nothing is preventing it from making it through the air gap. And that's why when it lands in the immutable storage on the other side, then we apply the CyberSense analytics to capture that, right? And that is the key component of the vault that puts the termination of that ransomware, right? Because if that backup image has traces of ransomware in there based on the analytics and index comparisons that it did, comparing it from previous days backup, then that backup image is marked do not restore, and you have the ability to restore to a previous copy, right? So that's how it does. And that's the reason why we do it, because we're not happy with just an air gap. Many solutions will provide you an air gap solution and a immutable copy solution, but they don't have that final analytics to be able to determine if that ransomware did get copied, right? So, right. That's a great question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
All right, follow us. We're all over social media. And if you Google cyber recovery, I believe the second hit is going to be my blog that I wrote. Is cyber recovery the new disaster recovery? And it's not, it's probably a couple-minute read, but very informative, right? So check it out. Just Google cyberspace recovery and you will find me there. And that is pretty much it. I just want to flip through here some slides on what a ransomware protection program is, general guidelines on what, on ransomware protection, user awareness training. We also provide that. So it's not just cyber recovery. ConvergeOne deals with cybersecurity, and like what Brian said, is an overlap. But me as a data protection and cyber recovery specialist, I focus on your ability to get to that data of last resort. Because if that ransomware made it in, and if your cybersecurity was not able to capture that, because it's not just coming through your firewalls. In the case of Tesla, a Russian hacker actually tried to bribe a Tesla employee to stick a USB drive into the computer, right? Bypassing all networking security, right? And if that makes it in and it encrypts your data, then cyber recovery is your last resort, right? So that said, that's the end of our presentation. I'm going to turn it back to you, Brian and Robert.
Thank you, Tony. Great job. Susan, I see you joined us here again. Were there any other questions that we missed, or do you think we got them all?
I think you got them all. Thank you so much for all the resources, both during the session and there at the end. I think that is a wrap. Lots of appreciation through the emojis. Hopefully you guys can see those. It's the only feedback we've got right now. So thank you so much. You mentioned this slide deck. That is something you could share. If you share it with me backstage, I'll post it somewhere that our folks can get to, and we'll have the video available too.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your help.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time today and all the expertise. Appreciate it. Have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.